Do you know any good sources where I can learn more about the ancient Greek origins of Goetia? It's a question that I was recently asked in our Discord for the seminary Sanctum of the Craft. I wanted to answer this for YouTube specifically, not just in the Discord, because of how much misinformation there is about the origins of the term Goetia and what it originally meant. I'm going to read off some of that misinformation, and I'm going to read it from one of the favored sources of misinformation in the online world, which is Wikipedia. But I want to note that Wikipedia is nowhere near the first place or only place I've encountered this misinformation. I spent quite a bit of time learning various ceremonial magical traditions and came across this misinformation in a lot of them. And then when we ran the community center and witchcraft shop to support it, this was something that came up fairly often there as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and answer it here. But first, let me just read off the misinformation. This is what Wikipedia says Goetia is, and what Wikipedia says its origin was and its etymology was. Goetia is a type of European sorcery, often referred to as witchcraft, that has been transmitted through grimoires, books containing instructions for performing magical practices. The term Goetia finds its origin in the Greek word goes, which originally denoted diviners, magicians, healers, and seers. Initially, it held a connotation of low magic, implying fraudulent or deceptive magia, as opposed to theurgy, which was regarded as divine magic. During the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, the Persian megus was, and I'm not sure what word this is supposed to be, Grecicized and introduced into the ancient Greek language as megos and mageia. So it says it's a Greek word, and then it corrects itself and is like, it's a Persian word, but I digress. In doing so, it transformed meaning, gaining negative connotations, with the megos being regarded as a charlatan whose ritual practices were fraudulent, strange, unconventional, and dangerous. Magical operators largely fell into two categories: theurgy, defined as high magic, and goetia as low magic or witchcraft. Theurgy in some contexts appears simply to glorify the kind of magic that is being practiced. Usually a respectable priest-like figure is associated with the ritual, and goetia was a derogatory term connotating low, specious, or fraudulent mageia. This is completely incorrect. Originally, goetia and mageia were different things. Goetia was not a kind of mageia. If any of you would like me to get into the origins of the term mageia and its evolution through time, I would be happy to. Specifically, this person who asked this question asked me for sources. So I'm going to talk a lot about sources in this video, and I'm going to quote some ancient Greek writing. I want to note that I'm not quoting everything that I possibly could. I have found a selection to quote in this video because otherwise it would be very long. Now, if you would like a more in-depth overview of this entire topic, I encourage you to join our Death, Ritual, and Magic course on the seminary, because we go far more in depth into this topic. Now, what on earth would death magic and death ritual have to do with the term Goetia? The term Goetia is related to Goes, a mourner, who sings a goos, a mourning song. Now, I will note I'm probably mispronouncing the word goos. I don't know, it might be meant to be pronounced goose or goose. I tried to find a pronunciation guide. I couldn't find one. So this is my best guess going off the Greek word, having looked at it in Greek and in the, what is the term for that? The Latinization. There we go. The goos was the improvised mourning song of the dead person's relatives, predominantly the female relatives. This is in contrast with the threnos, the formal mourning song of professional mourners, primarily men. The original Indo-European root word was go, referring to grief. This eventually evolved into Goetia, which was the art of calling the dead up using lamentation, which evolved into psychagogia, which is soul leading. The Greek ideas around the dead evolved over centuries, as many cultures did, but they had a specific shift that seemed to occur between the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. At that time, the culture transitioned from burying the dead close by, within a settlement's boundaries, to burying the dead in cemeteries outside of city walls. This, as well as contact with other cultures that they syncretized with and appropriated from and kind of stole wholesale ideas from, influenced their ideas about harmful and malicious dead. They borrowed a lot of their ideas of the harmful and the malicious dead from the Mesopotamians. This may have caused the Greeks over this century to shift more towards the idea that the dead were mysterious, powerful, and frightening. By the period of the Homeric poems, the 8th century BCE, the Greeks believed the dead whose bodies had not received proper funereal rites were capable and desirous of moving through the world of the living to inflict harm on those responsible for the circumstances of their death. In parts of the Odyssey, it is indicated that those who died before accomplishing what would define success in their life were excluded from the underworld, and they too may seek to harm the living. Now, this transition to fearing the dead and burying the dead outside of the city was not universal, at least according to some sources. According to Plutarch, who lived much later, Lycurgus insisted that the Spartans bury their dead within the city so that young men might get used to the notion of death and the dead and not superstitiously fear them. The idea of the journey to the underworld and what that looked like also evolved during this time. In the older Homeric poems, most travel to the underworld was presented as being very simple and direct, with the soul flying to Hades, and it just goes. By the later portions of the Homeric poems, in the Odyssey, like portions written later, Hermes was described as guiding the soul across the boundary to the underworld. In the later Minyas, it's a psychopomp, Charon, that is introduced, with a river dividing the land of the living and the dead, and Charon actually ferrying souls across it. So this developed over time. The change in cultural attitudes towards the dead was reflected in the changes in funeral lamentation. In the Homeric poems, there were two distinct ways of performing the funeral lamentations, threnos and goos. Threnos was controlled, composed, orderly, and professional. It usually assured the dead that they had accomplished worthy and honorable things, and it was almost always performed by men. Goos was emotional, spontaneous. It expressed pain. It was particularly performed by women. Sometimes it actually reproached the dead for having abandoned the living and left them unprotected. This can be seen in the Iliad, when Andromache told the dead Hector that Astyanax would have to beg for food at the tables of other men. The Gooi transitioned over several centuries from being an expression of passionate loss to being a call to the dead to avenge the injustice of their own death and the suffering of the living that they had left behind. This can be seen in the Chiophorai by Aeschylus, whose name I hope I'm not butchering too badly, which was written in 450 BCE, when the chorus of lamenting women urged Orestes to avenge his father's death, and then Orestes and Electra begged the dead Agamemnon to support their attack on his murderers. In another of Aeschylus' tragedies, The Persians, Darius was raised from the dead and then asked to give advice on how to win the war with Greece. During the late Archaic and Classical periods, the Goos and Threnos were restricted by laws that governed funerary practices. The Goos were limited by the number of women allowed to participate, the length of the Goos, the frequency of the Goos, and where they could be performed. This was likely done in order to silence the voices calling for revenge in various conflicts in order to unify the polis. So this was sort of a nationalistic or state employed method of unifying the people. Basically, hey, stop going around lamenting and crying out for the dead and saying how bad your life will be now that they've died. Instead, we want people willing to die for the polis. Epimenides of Knossos, a semi-mythical 7th or 6th century BCE Greek seer and philosopher poet, was recorded by Plutarch, who lived in the 1st century CE, as having rid the city of the terrors and ghosts that were roused by the Cylonian affair. After this, Plutarch claimed he taught the Athenians to be milder in their rites of mourning. This was done by restricting the harsh practices of mourning and lamenting women. The techne, the methodology of controlling the dead via lamentation, appeared in Greek culture at the same time as conversing with the dead became restricted. The Goetes, which is the plural of the Goes, so one is a Goes and the plural is Goetes, became experts in the techniques of controlling the dead, called Goetia, rather than a mourning member of the dead person's family. Early sources connected Goetia, the practice of the Goes who sang the Goos, with songs. The dactyls, an archaic mythical race of beings associated with metalworking, blacksmithery, mathematics, healings, were also Goetes. The Furones, composed sometime in the late 7th or early 6th century BCE, claimed the Idaean dactyls were Goetes. The 5th century historian Pherecydes also described the dactyls this way, and said that there were two types, those to the left, who were Goetes, and those to the right, who in contrast were Analuontes, meaning releasers. In the 4th century BCE, an Attic curse also referred to the Analuo as meaning to release from a binding spell. The 4th century BCE historian Ephorus, as related by Diodorus Siculus, who again was writing this in the 1st century, also claimed the dactyls were Goetes and that they taught this to Orpheus. Ephorus, still through Diodorus Siculus, related that the dactyls were experts in the mysteria, specifically said that they were experts in the techniques of, so the techne, of the mysteries. Their student Orpheus was himself referred to as a Goes, and the founder of the orgiastic initiations by Strabo, a contemporary of Diodorus Siculus, and by Lucian. One of Diodorus Siculus' sources on Orpheus was an Orphic poem that dates to the early Hellenistic period. By the classical period, Orpheus was reported as such an effective Goes that he could use his lyre and his voice to persuade the entities of the realm of the dead to release the soul of his dead wife. By the time of the Roman author Varro, Orpheus was credited as being the author of the book called The Lyre, which taught others to invoke souls using music, which would have been Goetia. Orpheus's role in myth as a Goes eventually evolved into a Goetic mystery cult. Our earliest mention of Orpheus's trip to Hades to recover his wife is in the writings of Euripides, a tragedian of classical Athens, in his Alcestis. Other references to the dead returning can be found in one of Euripides' lost stories, and in a fragment of Phrynichus's Alcestis. Euripides' Bacchae also had Pentheus refer to Dionysus, who had traveled to Thebes to introduce his mysteries, as a chanting Goes. Later, when Plato referred derogatorily to the practices of those who went door to door, selling cursed tablets and the sendings of ghosts, Plato referred to the practitioners having books supposedly created by Orpheus and Musaeus, Musaeus being the most famous as the founder of mysteries. The aforementioned invocation of Darius's soul in Aeschylus's The Persians from 472 BCE is one of the earliest detailed records of psychagogia. The queen carried milk, honey, water, wine, and oil to Darius's tomb. These are all extremely traditional funereal offerings from the ancient world. Then she asked the chorus of Persian men to sing hymnos, songs, to call up the soul of Darius. While she poured out the libations, the songs called upon Ge, Hermes, and Hades to send up the king's soul. The songs were described as being discordant, so think wailing lamentations. When Darius appeared, he referred to the singing as psychagogia. This is line 687, if you are curious and want to look it up yourself, and that he had been persuaded by the Gooi, so plural of the songs, to come up from below. Empedocles, a Greek pre-Socratic philosopher best known for originating the cosmogonic theory of the four classical elements, taught Goetia. In one of his poetry fragments, he boasted that he would teach his students to lead souls back out of Hades. This claim was confirmed by comments made by his pupil Gorgias and by the remarks of later authors such as Diogenes Laertius. Gorgias, an ancient Greek sophist and philosopher, recorded his opinion that incantations belonged to a range of technae, again, these being techniques or artifices, subsumed under the heading of Goetia and Mageia, which both operated in the domain of falsehood and illusion. These are errors of the soul and intellect and beguilement of opinion. But I want to note here that Gorgias, who lived in 483 BCE to 375 BCE, recorded that Goetia and Mageia are different things, and that this pops up a lot in ancient Greek magic. Goetia is not a subset of Mageia. They are two different things. A 4th century BCE tablet from Dodona recorded that the oracle at Delphi was asked the question, shall we hire Dorius the Psychagogos or not? Unfortunately, we don't know the context. We don't know if it's like, should we hire a different Goes? Or should we pursue a different methodology of solving this problem and not use Goetia to solve this problem? It was just, that's all we have. The aforementioned Plato was very disparaging regarding the Goetes, and referred to a Goes as someone who deceived or deluded someone, and Goetia as the art of making a person believe in things that aren't really there. Plato's Meno, a Socratic dialogue, claimed that if Socrates were to emigrate to another city-state, he might be brought up on charges like a Goes, which might indicate that in some places Goetes were actually arrested, but could also indicate that only certain kinds of Goes were forbidden, which was actually quite common, that rather than the entire magical profession being forbidden, specific things that you did with that kind of magic could be forbidden, like influencing elections. In his work Laws, Plato recorded that those who practiced Goetia claimed that their work could do two things: lead up souls and persuade the gods. In some cases, the Goetes were recorded as working with Hecate, as well as Ge, Hermes, and Hades. In The Sophist by Plato, the stranger described sophists as using Goetia to bring verbal ghosts to light using their words. Plutarch referenced Goetia in his Advice to Bride and Groom in Moralia. So basically in his morals, he basically was like, hey, don't do this. He told the daughters of Deianira, one goes fishing with poison, one quickly captures and easily lands the fish, but the poison renders the fish inedible and disgusting. In the same way, those women who devise philtra, so love potions, and Goetia, so this kind of magic, against their husbands and controlled them through pleasure, share their lives with bewildered, mindless, and ruined men. For the men enchanted by Circe were of no benefit to her, nor did she use them for anything after transforming them into pigs and asses, but she cherished a surpassing love for Odysseus, who retained his mind and shared her life in prudent fashion. Diogenes Laertius, who flourished in the 3rd century CE, a biographer of the Greek philosophers, wrote, Satyrus says that this same man, Gorgias, said that he assisted when Empedocles performed Goetia. Indeed, Empedocles himself lays claim to this talent through his own poetry, as well as to many other talents, when he says, You will learn cures for ills and aids against old age, because for you alone will I accomplish all these things. You will stop the force of tireless winds, which blow over land and destroy fields with their blasts, and again, if you wish, you will lead forth breezes that compensate. You will make dry weather in the proper season for people. After dark rain, you will make tree-nourishing streams pour forth from the sky where they dwell after summer's dryness, and you will lead forth from Hades the life force of a dead man. Timaeus, in the 18th book of his Histories, also tells us that Empedocles was admired for many reasons. For instance, when the Etesian winds began to blow violently once, damaging the crops, he ordered asses to be skinned and bags to be made of the hides. These he stretched out at various places along the hill to check the wind, and for this reason he was called Windstopper. Eusebius of Caesarea wrote in the 4th century CE, in response to Hierocles' comparison of Apollonius and Jesus, a statement that condemned Hierocles' comments. This is funny to me. I'm going to go ahead and read it off because I think it's hilarious. Hierocles is admiring and approving of Apollonius and claims that he performs his miracles not with Goetia, but with certain divine and ineffable wisdom. He claims, too, that they were truly performed in the fashion in which he happened to believe they were, and maintains this without proof. Hear what he says, and I quote him verbatim. They prattle out their exaltations of Jesus all over the place, with the claim that he made the blind see and performed miracles of this sort. Then he says some other things before adding, However, let us consider how much better and more intelligent our understanding of such things is, and let us consider our ideas about virtuous men. After this, he passes over Aristeas of Proconnesus and Pythagoras as too ancient, and continues, But in the age of our forefathers, during the principate of Nero, came the floret of Apollonius of Tyana. From the time when he was still just a young boy and served as a priest of Asclepius, who loves mortal men, in the Goetia and Cilicia, he accomplished a great many miracles. I shall pass over the bulk of them and make mention of just a few. Then he begins with the first and catalogues his amazing acts, after which he adds the following words. For what reason did I bring this subject up? So that you may be able to compare and contrast our accurate and solid judgment on each point with the gullibility of the Christians. For we consider a man who has done such things not a god, but a man that is pleasing to the gods. But they proclaim Jesus a god on the basis of a few wonders. After a few more words, he adds to this the following claim. This too is worth thinking about. Peter and Paul and others of their ilk have exaggerated Jesus' exploits. These men were liars. They were uneducated, and they were Goetes. But the exploits of Apollonius are recorded by Maximus of Aegea, Darnus the philosopher who went about with him, and Philostratus of Athens. These men were highly educated, they had a respect for the truth based on their love of humanity, and they wanted to publicize the actions of a man who was noble and dear to the gods. These are the verbatim words of Hierocles, who wrote the treatise, The Lover of Truth Against Us. He adds the following words. What has been said makes it clear that he makes predictions of this sort under the influence of a demon, and that the argument of those who consider him a Goes is unsound. But let us consider this too. I hold Goetia to be the most unfortunate of men. Some of them turn their hand to the torturing of ghosts, others to savage sacrifices, others again to incantations and anointings. In doing this, they claim to alter fate. But Apollonius followed the ordinances of the fates, and he predicted that it was inevitable that they would be fulfilled. He made his predictions not through sorcery, but from the revelations of the gods. When he was with the Indians and saw their tripods and wine jars and all the other things I said used to come in of their own accord, he did not ask how these tricks were done, nor did he want to find out. He praised them, but he did not think it appropriate to copy them. So, this is a person quoting someone else, being very, very angry that the Christians are claiming that Jesus is a god, when really he considers Jesus to be a goes. And then he's explaining Apollonius was not a goes, but he did many of the same miracles that Jesus did. And then he goes on to explain why he thinks Goetia is bad. I think this is phenomenal and hilarious. Cosmas in the 6th century stated, Goetia is calling upon evil demons that dwell around tombs. It derives its name from the gooi and threnoi of those around tombs. Cosmas defined mageia as the invocation of good demons for the purpose of doing good. So here again, even by the 6th century CE, we do not have mageia being the umbrella term under which Goetia is placed. Instead, we have these as two equal things, but it's also a very early example of Goetia no longer being the calling of human souls, but the calling of evil demons, which definitely stuck around and became one of the more predominant definitions of Goetia. But again, Goetia wasn't a kind of mageia. These were two kinds of spiritual magical practices, but one was not the umbrella term for the other. The Suda, a large 10th century CE Byzantine encyclopedic lexicon of the ancient Mediterranean world, which contains 30,000 entries that drew from ancient sources, many of which have unfortunately since been lost, recorded different definitions for Goetia, mageia, and also pharmakeia. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the history it gives them, but even by the 10th century CE in Byzantine writings, Goetia is not a subset of mageia. Goetia, mageia, and pharmakeia are different things. They were the inventions of the Medes and the Persians. Mageia is the invocation of beneficent demons to achieve a good goal, as with the miracles of Apollonius of Tyana. Goetia is applied to the raising of the dead by invocation of the name, and the term is derived from the lamentations, goon, and threnoides of people around the grave. The term pharmakeia is used whenever some deadly drug is made into a potion and given to someone by mouth. Mageia and astrology were begun by the Magosaioi. For the Persians were called Magog by the natives. The name Magosaioi is itself derived from the Semitic version of Magos. This is not true. This is not at all true, but still, by the 10th century CE in the Byzantine records, Goetia is not a subset of mageia. The Suda also recorded an account of Empedocles being a goes. They say that Empedocles brought a woman who was not breathing back to life. They say that this woman without breath was such that for 30 days her body remained without breath or food. Thus, Empedocles was a goes. So, the modern misinformed information on Goetia claims that it is a subset of mageia. It isn't. And claims that it is a written, grimoire-based form of magic. It isn't. Or at least, it wasn't. I acknowledge that the definitions of words change over time, and what Goetia is now may not be what it was. In fact, it evolved during the Greek period, as we've already covered. So let me correct myself and not misinform. Goetia's origin was not written magic in the grimoires. It was not controlling evil demons through written magic. It originated in the Lamentations for the Dead and became a method of calling up the dead and sending them to perform specific tasks, and evolved into the role of a person who did this. So I'm aware of what it was, and what I really wish is that when people wrote about this online, they wrote about its origin correctly. Please feel free to send us more questions in the comments below, or join our Discord and send them to us there, or send them to staff@sanctumofthecraft.org, or join our ongoing course on Death, Ritual, and Magic, which is on Sanctum Seminary at sanctumofthecraft.org.